Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster and Yoko. That was an awesome speech. So thank you for that. As mentioned, the title of my speech is History Matters. So when I reflected on giving a speech with a purpose, I thought first, what do I know? And then second, what would all of you find interesting? So I recently finished finals of the first quarter at MPS, and I was able to reflect on what I've learned thus far. And I wanted to share one of my areas of study with all of you. Now, a quick disclaimer, this does not reflect the views of the U.S. government or United States Marine Corps. It's solely my views from my study. Another disclaimer is that history is pretty dark. For those of you that enjoy studying history, you know this. Those of you that don't study history as often, hopefully you find this enlightening, but I do want to warn you that a lot of what humans have done to other humans over the course of history is not that great. So we've all heard the saying that those who do not know history are bound to repeat it. The bottom line up front, or the purpose of this speech, is to challenge you to think critically about the past to ensure a positive future. Now, I admit this is a daunting challenge and one that I struggle with on a day-to-day basis as a student studying national security affairs. As Arnie talked about a few weeks ago when we discussed the civil rights movement, we must be willing to see issues from multiple angles and perspectives. So I recently wrote a paper on the influence of race in superpower governments, encouraging their citizens to go to war, and also how to inoculate hate from a domestic population against a foreign population. Now, I agree this is a complicated topic, and one that I don't believe there is a right or wrong answer or a specific way to analyze it. I also acknowledge that the influence of race is an emotional topic. So I'm not going to reference the recent domestic issues in the United States. In fact, we're going to take a trip back in time to World War II and use World War II as a case study. So I'm going to discuss how Germany, United States, and Japan all use race as a basis for violence during the war. Freshman year at the Naval Academy, we were required to go to the Holocaust Museum. Now, for those of you that have been there, I'm sure you share similar sentiments with me that it's extremely memorable, but also humbling. You walk into one room and it's full of shoes, and you can smell the leather. And it's almost as if it was taken off the men, women, and children yesterday. You go into another room, and there's a wall of human hair that was shaved off the victims before they were sent to their deaths. So at this time, our tour guide was an old Jewish lady. She was a Holocaust survivor. And she took us through the exhibit, did an awesome job. And she took myself and about the 30 other midshipmen into a room afterwards. And she looked at us, and I always remember this, and she says, "The reason I'm educating you here today is because you have the ability to influence change and ensure that something like this does not happen again." That was powerful for me, and so that's one of the reasons I wanted to share a little bit of my studies this quarter. So I recently read the book Ordinary Men. It's titled Ordinary Men, Reserve Battalion 101 and the Final Solution in Poland by Christopher Browning. Now this book opens up with the police commander. It's a police order. These are not like SS troops. It opens up with him at about 4 a.m. speaking to his unit and saying, "Gentlemen, we have a tough job to do today. For those of you that do not want to participate, you can step out." Well, that job was to literally go down the road to the local Jewish village and kill the 4,000 men, women, and children that lived there. As the title suggests, these were ordinary men. They were not necessarily hardline killers or Nazi sympathizers. In fact, many of them grew up in Germany prior to the rise of the Nazi regime. But on July 13, 1942, more than 80% of the police battalion followed orders and participated in the mass killing of Jewish men, women, and children at point blank range. Now, one might ask, how could normal men succumb to such violence? If one investigates the history of their training or their indoctrination process under the Nazi regime, it offers us a few clues. They call this the strengthening of character for the order police. And they study topics such as race is the basis of our worldview, or maintaining the purity of blood. Now, I'm not saying these are the only reasons why men would commit such actions, but the negative racial stereotypes pushed through this indoctrination propaganda, along with the state sanctioning of violence against Jews, enabled ordinary men to commit acts of atrocity. Now, though different actors, the theme in the Pacific was similar. In the book War Without Mercy, Race and Power in the Pacific War by John Dower, the racist propaganda used by the United States portrayed the Japanese as something of subhuman, using images of apes and vermin to represent the enemy. Even American political and military leaders used race as a justification for the violence. They came out, such as Senator Thomas Hart in 1945, publicly claiming that the Japanese were savages and that it's in their blood and must be washed out. Now, on the flip side, the Japanese at the time were no better. An Imperial Army document discovered from 1942 demonstrates that the Japanese divided nationalities into master races, friendly races, and guest races, with the most coveted position reserved for the Yamato race, and that's the one of the emperor. So now this race justification or differentiation allowed the Japanese to commit acts of violence without remorse, including the severe torturing and murdering of American prisoners of war. Now I share these lessons because we must understand the past to hopefully ameliorate a brighter future. The use of race in politics and war is not new, but by understanding what wrong looks like, we can be better equipped to negate the effects of it in the future. Now, when I wrote this, I didn't know what the actual theme of today's meeting was. Favorite quotes. I wouldn't say this is one of my favorite quotes, but I think it's a quote that rightfully sums up what I'm trying to get across. This quote was by Martin Niemöller, who was a prisoner during the Holocaust, and it's inscribed on the Holocaust Museum walls and explains the why behind this speech, and that thinking critically and understanding history matters. He stated, "First, they came for the socialist, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." Back to you, Mr. Toastmaster.